Welcome to the Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs at Chick Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, it's all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, except instead of sex, it's Nazis, and also there's machetes. This is Green Room.
This is a tale of horror and blood. Let's go!
Welcome to Blastober.
Welcome to the Blasto.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Shudder account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a demon with horns and bat wings and summonings about movies.
Movies like Green Room, which we're talking about today. Before we get into that, Ian, how are you doing this week?
How is it the first week of spooky season and I've already eaten too much Halloween candy? And I'm not showing any signs of slowing down. I just discovered Reese's Bats, and honestly, they might be the best holiday shape yet.
You were very excited about the Reese's Bats.
Yeah.
You haven't stopped talking about them for a couple days now.
The eggs are fantastic. The trees, the pumpkins, they're all amazing. But the bats are a little chunky. They're little thick boys. So they're like have an even better PB to chocolate ratio when you bite into them. So hold on, folks. It's going to be a belt-busting Blastober for Ian.
What is up with the alternate Reese's shapes being so much better than regular Reese's? Is it just that it's different, or is it actually better designed?
I think they're better designed. The worst mistake I ever made was buying Reese's Thins, which is like all chocolate with almost no peanut butter. I'm like, this is a disaster. Yeah. And then you go up the ladder to the traditional cups and then the holiday shapes, which are just like mostly peanut butter, and it's rad.
I found something out when I was baking years ago with my mom. We were making Buckeyes, which are a favorite treat of mine.
Oh, yes.
They're basically chocolate and peanut butter balls. But
homemade Reese's.
When they say chocolate and peanut butter, though, that's a bit disingenuous because there is a major third ingredient. Do you know what it is?
What is it?
It's powdered sugar. Like half the peanut butter is replaced with powdered sugar.
That's right.
Because you need it to have that thicker consistency to stay together. And also you want it to be sweeter.
Yes.
So you can't just be like, wow, peanut butter and chocolate. Who knew? They go so great together. It's like, no, man, you add 5 extra pounds of sugar to the already extremely sweet.
I made them one time from a recipe and I forgot that. That's the secret ingredient. That's the difference between peanut butter, which is oily and goopy and drippy, and Reese's peanut butter, which is dense and slightly chalky and has that little bit of bite to it.
And I guess if you add enough powdered sugar, eventually you just get whatever the hell's on the inside of a Butterfinger. Like, is that how you get that?
It crystallizes, forms strata. Yeah, I would like to conduct that experiment, perhaps.
I would too, but my cholesterol would not. That's great. That's exciting, I guess. You're enjoying the finer things in life, indulging, being a sweet boy, and that's great. I'm also enjoying the finer things in life, but not candy. I'm very excited. I have a big concert to go to tomorrow, so by the time this episode comes out, I will have attended the Menzingers show in Worcester, Mass.
Wow.
One of my favorite bands for any listeners that are also fans of the Menzingers. If you're there, maybe I'll see you, but you won't know about it till after the show, which is how I did this on purpose.
Another band that I don't know anything about, but I am curious. Now I'm going to have to look up the Menzingers.
They're Pennsylvania boys from Scranton originally, but based out of Philly now. So I'm going to have to ask them, hey, which way are you gentlemen voting? Because you're in that very important swing state.
Swing band.
No, if you listen to their lyrics, it's pretty clear which way they're voting.
Okay.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to support a band that shares any politics with the venue owners of this week's movie.
What a good tie-in. Talk about bands and their politics. That's the whole plot of this movie.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves, Ian. Did you happen to watch anything this week that you wanted to share with the listeners?
I sure did. The guy asked for something spooky. So I watched Interview with the Vampire, a recent TV show, which is AMC's readaptation of the famous Anne Rice story. Back in the day, I was a fan of her books and a little bit of the weird Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise movie. I heard that this new series was good, so I tried it. And it is. It's not amazing, but it's definitely worth a try if you're into that stuff in particular or that kind of thing in general. I don't know a lot about the production. I didn't really research it, but the cast is strong. The one actor that I recognize is Jacob Anderson. He plays the lead role of the main vampire, Louis.
His name's Louis?
Louis de Pointe-du-Lac. It's like a French Creole people in New Orleans. And you might know the guy, Jacob Anderson, from Game of Thrones, where he was Grey Worm, the eunuch warrior commander of the Unsullied.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's good. Lestat is good. The child vampire Claudia. It's a good cast. It's not a new show. There's 2 seasons out already. It's on AMC, and they renewed it for a third one. But the first season is now up on on Netflix, which makes it easy for me to just flip it on anytime. And I'm only through 4 episodes, but I'm into it.
Nice. I saw the movie many years ago. I remember being creeped out by it, especially like Kirsten Dunst's little child vampire. But I never got into the Anne Rice books, which, as I understand, that are kind of vampire horror and also kind of soft porn.
They have a vampire romance element to it that I think is more grown up than our more recent young adult versions of vampire romances that took the screen. But I think the creators of this AMC show took some license. They took it to different places, and I like a lot about it.
Nice. I did ask for something spooky, and you delivered. And I have something spooky to share with the listeners as well.
Okay.
I am almost done with the 6-part documentary series, Mr. McMahon, produced by the Ringer Films. Can I say peers? I don't know. They're on a different level of podcasting fame than we are. But Sean Fennessy was one of the executive producers of it. A lot of Ringer personnel is involved in it. I got to see one of my favorite Ringer podcasters, David Shoemaker. He pops up as a talking head throughout.
Nice.
But also, it's the level of star power from the wrestling world they got for this documentary is enormous. They got Vince McMahon himself, and he left the production at some point when his, for lack of a better term, Diddy-esque scandals were breaking. And he stepped away from the production at that point. But they got all of his immediate family, his wife, his kids, his son-in-law, Triple H. They've got every wrestler you could think of, whether they were on good terms or bad terms with Vince McMahon, popped up, like racist ass Hulk Hogan, allegedly. But just as a pretty lifelong wrestling fan, like I'm lapsed now. I haven't followed it probably for 10 years closely. But before that time, I was very much a big wrestling fan. So there's really not a lot of revelations in this documentary that they uncovered. It's mostly just a recap of McMahon's career and the WWF/E as a whole. But it is interesting to see it all laid out chronologically like it is, and also to hear from some top stars that probably weren't at liberty to speak openly about these things when they happened because they were still under contract or still active. So now that they can voice their opinions on a lot of these situations, like the steroid trial of the early 90s, the feud with WCW and Ted Turner swooping in to steal a lot of their top stars. The Owen Hart accident was covered. The Chris Benoit thing is coming up. There's been hints about it. It's certainly not painting a flattering, glamorous picture of the business, but making a flattering, glamorous documentary about Vince McMahon would feel quite disingenuous now anyway.
Yeah.
It seems right on the money. I'm really enjoying it. It maybe would be more valuable for new fans or younger fans that didn't live through a lot of these situations already. But even as somebody who's enjoyed wrestling for a long time, I think you could still benefit from hearing these different perspectives.
You know, I haven't followed wrestling at all. I watched a little bit of Hulk Hogan and Iron Sheik action back in the day when it was on my Saturday morning TV, but I feel like this could be helpful to me if I ever need to catch up to where a friend's at, like you, for example, with wrestling and the various people and personas in history. This seems like a great cheat sheet.
Yeah, and there's a brief segment focusing on one of the worst movies ever made that was also a massive box office bomb called No Holds Barred, which was produced by Vince McMahon and starring Hulk Hogan at, the peak of his powers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And yeah, it's a real piece of shit. So if we ever want to subject ourselves to that,
one day
watching this series could give you some valuable insight.
Cool.
So let's talk about Green Room. Ian, I know that you had not seen this movie before we sat down to record it for the podcast, but one of the reasons we picked it for the podcast is because you kept being like, I really want to watch that movie.
Yeah.
I just got to find time to watch it. And I was like, you know what? It bombed. It lost money. Let's just do it. And then with Blastober coming up, I said, well, is it a horror movie? We hemmed and hawed a little bit about it, but ultimately decided that yes, it is, because it's downright horrific.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we can get into the details when we talk about the movie. I do think it qualifies, and obviously whatever we think goes on this podcast. But I had to think back. I remember my first impressions. I thought it was straight up horror. I thought it was like a Hostel style torture porn movie just based on the marketing. And obviously they can't reveal a lot about the plot. I was like, oh, I'm not going to watch that. That's that gross style of horror.
Torture porn.
Yeah, that I don't like. And then somebody, it might have been you at some point, was like, no, that's not what it is. It's a cool, smart thriller. It's worth watching. And so I did try starting it once. My fear got the better of me. Like just the anticipation was like, this is not the time. I backed out and I just never worked up the nerve to go back. So I'm really glad that Blastober gave me the chance to work up the nerve and watch this thing.
As Princess Vespa would say, you're glad. You're glad, 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 glad.
Too bad Joan is no longer with us for a biting quip to respond to that.
I wonder if he's glad. Yes. So this movie, I think I first heard about it before it was released, but didn't get to see it in theaters. It got a semi-wide release, like about 1,000 theaters total, which is not nothing, but the top movies get like 3,000, sometimes even 4,000 theaters at a time.
Right.
But the movie intrigued me enough, and the reviews from people I respect were good enough that I sought out Saulnier's previous movie, Blue Ruin, which I just absolutely loved. But by the time I had found a way to watch that, Green Room was out of theaters theaters and I couldn't see it in theaters anymore. But once it hit streaming and home media, I snatched it up and watched it and was prepared for some level of grisly violence because Blue Ruin is certainly not a movie for the faint of heart either. But there's some like just next level gore in this movie. But what really affected me about this movie overall, and I think you might relate to this as well, is I grew up playing in punk bands and hardcore bands in the New York City hardcore scene. And certainly there's not that level of neo-Nazi activity in New York City as there is in the Pacific Northwest, which unfortunately is the home base for a lot of those types.
Yeah.
There was just this feeling at a lot of these venues and a lot of parties where bands were playing that a lot of these people were just there to, you know, get some blood on their boots and their knuckles, and things could go very wrong very quickly. And this movie just captured that feeling about we're in way over our heads, and if shit goes bad, we're going to be really fucked. And then it does, which is like, you know, luckily that feeling never came to fruition most of the time, but this is like the worst case scenario.
Totally. And what I read is that the writer-director, Jeremy Saulnier, also played in hardcore bands as a youth. And so it feels really realistic. Like he went out of his way to make sure it's realistic. And honestly, the first part of the movie works as like an indie punk band drama until terrible shit starts to happen, which really doesn't get crazy till kind of the middle of the movie. It's like an indie drama that happens to be a gritty, realistic depiction of what it's like to be young and overly idealistic about your punk rock that your band makes.
Yeah, for the record, Saulnier's band was called No Turn on Fred, which is just a terrible name for a hardcore band.
It's bad. It took me a minute to decode the No Turn on Red Fred thing, but then who is Fred? Does it mean something to them? Who knows?
Somehow I doubt it. I feel like no matter how talented you are, you're not making it with that band name.
With Fred in your band name?
Except Right Said Fred, but you know,
yeah,
one that wonders.
One and done.
So yeah, there's not a ton of behind the scenes details about this movie and how it came to be, but I can give you the background such as it is.
For sure. Let's hear how this thing happened.
All right. After 2007's Murder Party failed to make much of a dent in the public consciousness, writer-director Jeremy Saulnier recruited his buddy and longtime collaborator Macon Blair to make a blood-soaked tale of revenge called Blue Ruin. The 2013 thriller was the middle entry in what Saulnier calls his incompetent protagonist trilogy, featuring main characters in situations they are woefully unprepared for.
Well, it's relatable.
While not a financial hit, Blue Ruin was a critical darling and gave Saulnier some cachet in the film industry. He surmised that he was now famous enough to get a project of his choosing off the ground, but not so famous that studios would push him to do more mainstream fare. So he decided to make his next movie the punk rock horror thriller Green Room, the final entry in his incompetent protagonist trilogy, about a punk rock band that finds himself stranded at a neo-Nazi venue where the owners and patrons would very much like to murder them.
Aren't club owners the worst?
The movie was announced on May 22nd, 2014, and in October of that same year, Anton, Yelchin, Imogen, Poots, Alia, Shawkat, and Patrick Stewart were also announced as stars of the film.
Make it so.
With a $5 million budget secured, filming began immediately that same month in the woods near Portland, Oregon. The movie debuted in April 2015 at Cannes to rave reviews, but had trouble getting released until A24 stepped in. They would give the movie a semi-wide release on May 13th, 2016, but it would only go as high as 16th place, eventually leaving theaters with a worldwide gross of $3.8 million.
That's like $6 each once you split it between the band.
The movie's financial woes were quickly overshadowed by accolades, as it made several Best of the Year lists and has remained a cult classic. However, the movie is also mired in tragedy, as it was the final movie released theatrically while star Anton Yelchin was alive.
Rest in peace, Anton Yelchin.
Yeah.
What a loss.
Very sad story. You know, he's very winning in most of his roles, but he really does play a puppy dog type character very well. And for a rough and tumble bunch of punk rockers, like he still somehow manages to be the quiet, sensitive one.
Yeah, he's excellent in this. And as you're talking about the incompetent protagonist trilogy, he's perfect. He's like the least likely member of this generally incompetent punk band to be the final hero, the avenging angel.
To be clear, they're not incompetent as a band.
No, they're actually good as a band. The movie actually takes its time to make that point, that despite them trying to piss off the Nazi punk crowd, they then win them over with their music when they go into the rest of their set. They actually are good, which is nice. It shows the heart of the movie and the heart of Saulnier towards the fictional band that he created, that he wants them to actually, you know, their circumstances might be pathetic, but they're good. They have talent.
They do have talent. Yeah, I actually really dug the songs that were written for the movie, in addition to the cover that they play, which we'll talk about in more depth in a little bit. But that's the thing, is we had, I wouldn't say qualms, qualms. I'm not going to say we had qualms. Don't put in the newspaper that we had qualms.
Do not do that.
But we were just kind of like, what was this thing here? Was this line, was that a mistake? Did this whole bit make sense? And then as we peeled it back on our second watch, as we tend to do, because we have to write a synopsis about these things, we're like, no, every little detail in the movie is mapped out. And great care was put into just about every aspect of it. It would have been easy to make the band shitty, and it would have probably been a lot less work to write shitty punk songs for them to play.
Right.
But no, like they kind of rip.
Yeah, I like that about it. And like you said, for a guy like me with a logic fetish, it's very satisfying that you really can connect all the dots in the plot of this movie. And I warmed up to it on second watch, like you said, even though it wasn't plot holes or difficulty following that gave me trouble the first time. That wasn't like a problem for me, but it was fun to go through and go, oh, that was that. Oh, and they set that up here.
Yeah, it's not that we disliked it at first. It's just that it gives you a deeper appreciation the second time around.
Yeah, it rewards a second watch because also it's very smart. It's moving very fast. The villain is very smart. The band stumbles into his weird little evil plans to get rid of this one girl and complicates his life, but it keeps getting more and more complicated. So the Patrick Stewart character, Darcy, has to adapt so many times and so fast to stay ahead of this problem because he's constantly trying to figure out how they're going to make it disappear and the cops go away and what they have to do now. And he keeps shifting. And he's such a smart villain that he moves so fast. Like that's actually why it's hard to keep up with the plot because the villain's super smart. He's changing his plan constantly, and the movie doesn't hold your hand. He just said, now we're doing this. And if you're paying really close attention, you can go, oh, I get it. He just figured out that this means that they have to do this way to hide the evidence. Whatever it is, there's all these little details like that. But on second watch, you can catch all those things and go, wow, Darcy's really is a scary villain in his competence to come up with a plan for how he's going to dispatch these kids.
Yeah. And we'll try to call those instances out where something might seem like a throwaway line that actually has a bigger meaning if you care to put the extra effort. But the movie absolutely works without those little details. If you just want to watch it as like an insane gonzo bloodbath, sure, like it works that way too.
I don't want you to scare people too much because if I heard you say that, I'd be like, oh, I can't watch this movie. It's an insane gonzo bloodbath. But I think even Saulnier said he went out of his way to not make it gratuitous horror movie style with long close-ups on the sort of murder tableaus. Although there's a couple close-ups.
I have some issues with his quote there.
There's a couple close-ups. I do think he needed to show the violence to make it scary, but it's not. This is not Terrifier. This is not a gore movie.
I was gonna throw out that I was about to say, look, I'm not saying this is Terrifier. It's funny you picked up on.
I would never and will never watch Terrifier, but
you're more of a Terrifier 2 guy.
Yeah, because it's so much gorier. No, this movie, all the violence is in service of the thriller story, which is a story about people stuck in a situation that feels very real life and not about gratuitous murders by a cartoon, monster.
Yeah, this is not a gore fest, but I think the violence is treated with a realism and like a mundanity almost that makes it more upsetting. I'll call out specific examples of this as we go through the plot, but there's a casualness to the violence that feels true to life that makes it more upsetting to watch, even if it's not as viscerally disgusting as like a horror movie would be.
Yeah, there are a few gross shots. People get cut in some gross ways, but the realism of the situations is what makes it really scary, that you can imagine shit just went bad. We're not at Camp Crystal Lake. This is not a place where people are supposed to be cut open and bleed. This is a green room of a punk club. This is not supposed to happen, and that's why it's terrifying.
All right, do you want to start going through the plot so we can call out some of these specifics?
Absolutely. Let's load in. The Ain't Rights are a punk band consisting of bassist Pat, played by Anton Yelchin, guitarist Sam, played by Alia Shawkat, drummer Reese, played by Joe Cole, and singer Tiger, played by Callum Turner. The band has been on a scrappy DIY tour of the Pacific Northwest, couch surfing and even siphoning gas from parked cars to keep their van going when money runs low. Their latest crash pad belongs to a college DJ who regretfully informs them the gig he booked has been canceled. But feeling bad, he hooks the band up with a replacement gig at a bar where his cousin Daniel works. The only catch is the venue is a skinhead punk club way out in the backwoods. When they arrive, the gang is upset to see that the place is a genuine neo-Nazi type of scene, but they're desperate for the gig and the money, and they decide to go ahead with it. Their performance goes okay, but things turn bad when they come off stage. Pat pops back in the green room and stumbles upon the scene of a murder. A young woman named Emily lies dead on the floor, and her friend Amber, played by Imogen, Poots, is being held at bay by the killer, a hulking member of the club's house band. Pat starts to call 911, but club bouncers Big Justin, played by Eric Edelstein, and Gabe, played by Macon Blair, force him and his bandmates back into the green room at gunpoint and take away all their phones. It's obvious the club personnel planned to cover up the girl's murder, and now the band knows too much. Outside, the club's owner arrives, a cold-blooded white nationalist kingpin named Darcy Banker, played by Patrick Stewart, who intends to make the band disappear. When the cops pull up, Gabe arranges a fake altercation between two young skinheads as a pretext to explain the 911 call and sends the police back on their way. Meanwhile, inside the green room, Amber and the band members spring into action. Reese uses his jiu-jitsu to subdue Big Justin and take away his pistol. They've turned the tables on their captor, but they're still locked in a room inside a Nazi bar in the middle of nowhere.
Strong beginning to the movie with the touring band drama and the difficulties of being a broke musician far from home. The movie starts in a pretty disorienting way with the shot of this van that has gone off the road into a cornfield.
Yeah.
And only like 20 feet into the cornfield, but still.
You're like, what's going on? And you realize the band narrowly escaped death because they were driving all night and the guy driving fell asleep. And luckily they rolled to a stop in this cornfield. But it's a great image. It's visually very cool and it's clever and creative. And it helps start to paint this picture of this scrappy little slightly desperate band on the road.
Yeah. And Tiger, the said driver of the bus, I just had to call this out because I shared it with you off mic and it deserves to be heard that Callum Turner, a British actor, is also Dua Lipa's boyfriend.
Wow.
Good for him.
Good. Yeah, go Callum. And Dua.
He's a winning actor. But the two, I don't want to call them the non-leads of the band, but we got Alia Shawkat and Anton Yelchin. Anton Yelchin, not born in America, but raised in America. And Alia Shawkat is American. But Joe Cole and Callum Turner, both Brits.
Yeah.
Convincing American accents.
For most of the time, there were a couple spots. Once I read, I don't know if it was IMDb trivia about spots where, especially Joe Cole's accent drops off in a couple tense moments. I started to hear it, but honestly, I didn't hear it on the first time through. They're totally good and fine.
Yeah, no, they nail it. But also like a punk singer being British it just makes sense.
It's pretty natural. Pretty good fit.
Yeah, but just really good cinematography in that opening scene. And the movie has a green tint to it overall. So the cornfield blends nicely with that.
It does. Green movie.
And then we get the scene of them talking to Tadpole, the college DJ. That kind of gets them into this predicament unwittingly, for sure. He seems like a very nice guy, big fan of the scene and wants everyone to be happy and make a little money. But did you share my thoughts about the band during this interview with Tadpole that they sound like a bunch of idiots?
I totally recognize that feeling of being a kid and being in your band and thinking that you're the defender of true music and like, these are the only good bands. This is the only good stuff. This is the only way to do it. Now, I didn't go so far in my youth in a band as to say, no, we don't want to make records with production quality because the only good music is experienced live in a room. I never went quite that far, but these guys have some.
You lose the texture.
They're full of themselves. They have some very dramatic ideas. And it's, to me, it's part of the realism of like kids in a punk band, but it's also part of my argument for why this is a horror movie because you've got sympathetic heroes, but they've also got some hubris, right? They're breaking the law a little bit. They're siphoning gas from cars. They're thinking too much of themselves. And all of that sort of sets you up in horror movie mode. You go, oh, maybe they quote unquote deserve to be killed by the slasher or whatever, because there's always some moral equation in a horror movie.
Yeah. And I think Saulnier is aware of how they come off in those scenes because they do this thing where they have to name their desert island band. If you could only listen to one band for the rest of your life, what would it be? And they all, the Misfits and Chrome X and all these very traditional bands that a punk rocker would give. And then later on when they're about to die or maybe die, when they're facing death, they're all like, oh, Prince. And like they give out their real answers, which are very different and much more accessible mainstream music. So they were putting on a facade for that scene as well.
Yeah, it's a running bit of the movie that works as both character revelations and jokes and subverts itself in the end. It's a good bit because it's a dumb question that the local scenester radio guy would ask them. And it pulls a lot about their characters out. It makes that visible over the course of the movie.
And now you raised the question there, do they deserve punishment for their sins? And their sins are not just siphoning gas or having hubris, but also like they willingly take money from a neo-Nazi promoter.
That's true.
They know it's probably a neo-Nazi venue before they even get there because they're warned, hey, don't talk politics with these guys and play your
Right.
heavier stuff. And that doesn't mean they're Nazis. It certainly paints a picture. And then when they get there, it's immediately clear that this is a fully blown neo-Nazi clubhouse and they could have just left.
Yeah.
But,
But they also couldn't. They're backed in because they used their last ounce of gas to get out to this backwoods location. So they're both culpable and a little bit desperate and backed into the situation in a good way.
Yeah. You had another note about another way it falls into the horror plot.
Yeah. To me, that's like a classic horror plot. Once it gets ramped up, it's like a group of people trapped in a location trying to get out and then they get killed one by one. That's pretty stock horror movie plotting right there.
Yeah, when I was watching, I was like, it's a haunted house movie. It's just, there's not ghosts, there's Nazis and pit bulls,
Yeah.
and what's going to pop out from around a corner and get you is the main tension. And it's just the villains look a lot like the heroes.
And despite the realism of the movie, where it tries to depict the way bands work and venues work and all that realistically because of the director's exposure to that, we both noticed that when you try to go outside this green room and find your way through this club, it's really hard. Like that he never gives you an establishing shot to build some geographic sense of which hallway goes where. It's just all dead end, dark hallways in this place for the perfect places to get ambushed and killed.
Yeah, he wanted us to be disoriented like the band is.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we feel whenever they leave the safety, the relative safety of the green room.
Yeah. And it's a perfect analogy to the haunted house type of scenario, except with funky punk graffiti on the walls.
And also swastikas.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit of those on the walls. The band, The Ain't Rights, we talked about them a little bit. We didn't really talk about Alia Shawkat much, but she's a very charming actress. We
Yeah.
all know her as Maybe from Arrested Development.
For sure.
But she's been acting a lot since then and doing great stuff. She is in Blink Twice, the new Zoe Kravitz directed horror movie starring Channing Tatum.
Oh, cool. I need to see that.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to check it out yet, but I know she's one of the stars. And I believe that was the movie that was originally called Pussy Island, if I'm remembering correctly.
Okay.
Yeah, you probably remember hearing about that movie. It was rebranded to Blink Twice because, obviously you're not going to theatrically release a movie named Pussy Island.
It's a little easier to market. I get that.
But I actually, when I queued this up on my Plex, I have it set to show me trailers before a movie because I like to believe I'm in a movie theater. And it queued up the Blink Twice trailer. And I was like, this looks really good. I should watch this.
That's perfect. Yeah, she's a great actor. I mean, all the casting in this is really good, but Alia Shawkat brings her unique kind of snarkiness, but yet innocence of youth still. Like, I don't even know how old she is, but she fits right in. And this band that's portrayed as pretty young, you believe her as a rock and roller. It just really worked for me.
I think she was like 26 when this was made. So she maybe skews a little younger, but still within that ballpark. They all seem pretty young. I would believe that they're 20, 22 at the most.
Yeah,
and
it works.
They have a naivete about them that comes through. They're all pretty baby-faced, to be sure.
When you think about this cast and you look down the list of names and you look up the actors, we found that we knew this or that person in the small to medium roles. It's really deep. It's really well cast. Saulnier has a great set of actors. We know Macon Blair, he's been a long-time collaborator with, who has a prominent role in this. But
yeah, they're best friends in real life. But he said he still made him audition for it because he didn't think he could pull it off.
Oh,
but
interesting.
He said he nailed it.
But yeah,
Macon Blair, you want to save it for when he's a little more prominent in the storyline.
We can come back to the bad guys later, which we said we'd try to tackle in the second act, although they're certainly here in the first act. But we didn't get to the straggler who was like, at first, the band is a little bit hostile to her, Amber, the dead girl's friend.
They're hostile to her with good reason. She seems to be affiliated with these neo-Nazis, and they're not really on board with that.
They have legit questions to ask her, and they do a little kind of quiet dialogue that happens as one scene is fading out, where they start to tackle that. But it's an interesting complexity to the moral logic of the movie that I thought it handled well, because it doesn't cut it really black and white one way or another, and it just leaves you to figure out whether she's an all right person or not over the course of the movie.
Yeah, what she says, she's like, I'm not a Nazi. It's just like, none of the people that ever treated me badly were white, is like what she says. And then she's like, it's a problem where I'm from, or something.
Right.
I was like, I don't know if I buy that. But also, she's got a darkness to her that the rest of the band doesn't. So like she's maybe not a great person, but she's on their side for this whole debacle. And they never really become friends.
Yeah, that line you quoted leaves a great opening, because honestly, you do still think she sounds kind of sketchy after that defense of herself. But then if you think about it, you're like, oh, what happened to this young woman that she fled into the arms of the Nazis? You can imagine that she certainly could have been victimized to an extent where her life has not been good, and she's not exactly happy about ending up here, but it was temporarily a safe space until suddenly it wasn't.
Yeah, I'm sure the neo-Nazis tend to prey on victimized people.
For sure.
And speaking of Nazis, when the band is in the green room looking at all the SS's and swastikas carved on the wall, Pat, the Anton Yelchin character, says, I have a really stupid idea. And we don't know exactly what his idea is until he gets on stage. When he tries to back out of it, and Alia Shawkat Sam says, "It was your idea. If you don't do it, I'll tell them you're Jewish." And they decide to open the show with an old standard, the Dead Kennedys classic, Nazi punks fuck off. They're really screaming. Like Tiger is screaming the fuck off part with quite a purpose behind it.
Yeah,
and
he's into it.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It works great. I didn't know it was Dead Kennedys. I'm not very much an expert on punk, but thankfully Tiger explained to the audience and to me afterwards that was a cover.
That was a cover.
And it works great.
They're getting bottles thrown at them and people are spitting on the stage, but also a few of them are bopping, But
it still rocks, and it's a great way for the band to, like you said, establish where their hearts really lie, because they did just decide to go ahead and blend in and take money and perform at this club that they clearly knew was unsavory. So they make their little stand, and then, like we mentioned, they piss some people off, but after that they win the crowd back over with the rest of their set, including winning over Worm, the most virulently, monstrously evil character in this movie, who's the one who actually killed Emily, and he stops before he leaves the room to compliment them on their music.
Particularly the song Toxic Evolution, which we don't get to hear.
No.
But he says, it's fucking hard, man. And
yeah,
Worm's a scary dude, but we'll find out what happens to him later. And it also is speaks to their hubris, though. You're outnumbered hundreds to 4.
Yeah.
And you're going to antagonize these violent creeps in their home base and just let the chips fall.
That's true. It's crazy. It's kind of idiotic, but it's also something to I'm proud of these kids for standing up for what they believed in. It's a nice moment.
Plus, just a great song written by the Dead Kennedys due to the rise of, they started just seeing more and more neo-Nazis show up at shows, and they didn't like it, and they wanted to let them know how they felt about it. So they wrote an anthem, and it's been covered and performed many times by many bands over the years as a rallying call. It's good to just have a song that you can play and let everyone know where you stand.
When you need it. And these guys.
Hopefully you never need it, but if you do, it's good that it's there. All right. Was there anything else from this first section we wanted to go over?
I don't think so. I think we can move along.
All right. I bet everything goes really well from here.
I'm sure it's going to just get nicer.
Trapped in the green room in a terrifying standoff, the band has no idea what to do next. So when Darcy talks to them through the door, seemingly wanting to de-escalate, they agree to hand over Justin's gun through the door for some fucking reason. But at the last moment, they realize it's a trick. They manage to pull back into the room, but not before they lose the gun, and Pat's arm is badly hacked up with machetes. Moments later, Justin tries to attack them, but Reese gets him in a chokehold. While the bouncer is incapacitated and nearly dying, Amber takes the box cutter he dropped and guts him with it, finishing him. Next, our heroes search the green room for another exit. They find a heroin lab underground, but it doesn't help because there's no way outside from there either. So they arm themselves and try to make an escape out the one and only door. But they're attacked by skinheads and attack dogs, who kill Reese and Tiger. Sam, Pat, and Amber are forced to retreat back into the green room. Darcy sends cousin Daniel into the club to kill them, but he ends up joining the hero's side when he finds out Darcy had his girlfriend Emily killed to prevent them from leaving the gang. Together, they make another escape attempt, but this time Daniel and Sam are killed. So once again, Pat and Amber retreat back into the green room. They're both wounded and scared, but as they begin to form a bond, they start to believe they might just find the will to get out of this alive.
Man, that's maybe the thing that drove me crazy about the movie on first watch was no, don't go back into the green room. And then they do it twice.
Where else are you going to go, man? There's fucking dogs eating people's faces.
That's true. Obviously, it makes sense for the horror movie that it is, but you feel why couldn't they just, keep running down hallways until they found some way out? But it's no, we're back. The third time, it's by that time, they've explored all their options and they really know there's nowhere else to go. But that first time is no, you went right back around into the green room. Damn it.
And they don't know what we know, which is that the Nazis have decided that they're not going to kill them with bullets because that would be harder to explain. They're going to kill them with dogs and or blades, which it seems like once these dogs have a person, they're fixated. So there's only one dog in that scene, as far as I could tell. Or there might be more than one, but they release one at a time because he says you can't release two at a time because they're fighting dogs and they'll fight each other.
That explains that.
So you got one dog who's fixated on just eating Tiger's neck for a while. And then a bunch of guys with machetes, they got to catch you to get you. So you could theoretically make a run for it, but they don't know that. They could just assume these guys they know they have guns and could be waiting to pick them off as soon as they run out of the building. But there's also Nazis waiting for them outside. And that is honestly, it's not a bloody scene really, but the scene where Reese gets killed is really one of the more upsetting scenes because he's been established as the badass of the group.
He's the jiu-jitsu guy.
The only one among them who could probably hold his own in a fight against these guys. And he jumps out of a window and is immediately stabbed like 5 times.
Yeah.
And is just laying there. And then the casualness with which the Nazis say lines like, oh, he's still breathing a little, but that's good because it'll make his time of death later. That's good for us. So just let him bleed.
That'll help with the scene. And just to explain what Darcy's figured out, which I was following along, that he was going to stage this thing where the band was like trying to break into his house, which is up the road, and they ignored the beware of dog signs and the dogs killed them. And that's why no bullets. It has to look like they were the interlopers. But yeah, all that stuff, it's pieced out to you, or you kind of like, oh, you get it. He seems to be arranging something. But yeah, Reese's death was blissfully like you felt the shanks that were going into him, but you didn't have to see it. And actually, you didn't see the machetes chopping Pat, but unfortunately,
you only see Saulnier's smart. He keeps us on the band's side of the door. So we don't really know what's happening, but we know it's not good because he's screaming a lot.
Yeah.
And then when he pulls his arm back in, these are not superficial cuts. Like you see the bone in a few spots and the arm is kind of dangly. It's hard. That was honestly more gross and upsetting to me than Big Justin's stomach just getting cut open like he had a zipper attached.
Both of those things happen within a minute. That is the meat of the movie. It happens right in the middle.
Literally the meat. Yeah.
That's
the Fleisch, we should say.
Oh, God. That is the money scene of the movie. And it's good, but yeah, it's so awful to watch. And Yelchin's acting, the way he's crying and screaming as he holds his arm and his hand is dangling like it's nearly chopped off. And then they fucking tape it up with duct tape. It's so gross. And
Can you imagine when they had to take the duct tape off?
Oh, my God. The hospital for him.
Jesus. I hope they knock him out first.
I hope exactly. You better be under for that.
He probably lost that, like a chunk of that arm, to be honest.
Yeah.
Just from, because he still goes for an entire night like that. There's no way it's not grossly infected.
In comparison, we talked about Tiger gets his throat ripped by a dog. That happens in the shadow. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Like the violence is actually toning itself down after that really traumatizing scene where the lights are bright in that green room and you see everything that you don't want to see.
Imagine a young man getting his throat ripped out by a pit bull is like, oh, the movie is really like using a light touch here. Like,
yeah.
I mean, like we don't see the dog eating him, but we see like his face as the dog's eating his neck and like he's spitting up blood. It's pretty rough, but the movie does pull back from there. Like I think the movie's just trying to teach you a lesson here. It's like shit's fucked and anything can happen to anybody.
Yeah. And to me, the third and the sort of the final really gruesome or shocking piece of violence was Daniel. So we described that Darcy sends Daniel in, telling him that
happened. Did we cover this in this section? Oh, no,
yeah,
we did.
We did.
Yeah. We did.
See, the plot is complex with people coming in and out of that green room. Yeah, Darcy sends Daniel in, and it's a pretty familiar horror or thriller movie plot twist where it's like, here comes a bad guy. Oh no, he's turning into a good guy. We have unexpected help. Oh, he's going to help us get out. And then he immediately gets a surprise shotgun blast to the face from off screen. And that was really shocking.
Yeah, but so fast to not be gory necessarily. Yeah. Meanwhile, then Sam, Alia Shawkat's character, also gets killed by a dog, but we really don't see anything there.
Right.
There is one shot later where we see the aftermath very briefly, but like it's blink and you'll miss it. The movie plays with, you could see like the dog's bottom half and he's clearly like pulling on a piece of meat, but it pulls back just before showing you the actual, like what he's feasting on.
Yeah, that feels like a strong choice from Saulnier, both because we've already seen the more grisly version of the dog death, so we don't need to keep rubbing it in, and because the woman is the victim this time, like he really didn't want to make that gratuitous, and I think that's a nice choice.
Yeah, it doesn't take away from the grisliness of it all. He's still giving us that, but it's maybe less gratuitous. But Big Justin, boy, does he meet a rough end, but couldn't happen to a nicer guy. What does he say? Like when Reese has him in an arm bar and he says, when I let go, what are you going to do? And he says, butt fuck you all or something like that. That Justin, he's not the friendliest Nazi. But it's Eric Edelstein, which threw me for a loop because Eric Edelstein, I'm quite familiar with him as an actor. I'm a fan of his work. He's always like a sweet dullard. Parks and Recreation, he was like a recurring character on, and maybe not sweet in that, but certainly a dullard in that show. And like Jurassic World, he's like the hapless security guard that gets eaten by the Indominus Rex when it escapes. Like he's always like that guy, you know, where bad stuff is happening to him, maybe that he doesn't necessarily deserve. And then this movie, I was like, oh yeah, he deserves it.
He's such a dick in the green room, but actually on second watch, I noticed that he starts off as a much nicer guy. Like just before,
no, he's very genial when like,
he's helping them with their equipment. He's going, don't worry. He's like, I got this one. Don't worry. I know how it goes. I'm careful with your equipment. Like he's actually being like the big nice guy bouncer until shit goes bad, and then he's the biggest dick in the world.
Yeah, and I think the movie was kind of smart in that sense that none of these guys come off as cartoon villains except Worm.
Worm's
the one guy who's just immediately angry at everyone and like, but everyone else is like, oh, they're Nazis, but like they seem polite enough. And I don't know if you caught this. There's a lot of mentions of red laces in the movie. And like, we only want red laces working on this. And red laces is somebody who is either shed blood or killed someone for the neo-Nazi movement. And then you can wear red laces in your combat boots. And when Amber is looking through that little duct that got kicked, so now she can see through it into the hallway when Pat's handing over the gun, she sees boots with red laces. And that's why she knows that they're there to kill them and not to resolve the situation peacefully.
That's another one of those tiny little plot details that you still know what happened in that scene if you don't connect that, because she's looking and she goes, oh, they're ambushing us. Like, you still get it.
They're killing us, she says, which is not like they're gonna kill us. It's like actively happening already.
It's a cool line. And yeah, once you know it's because she saw the red, it's like, oh, things connect. And they carry the red laces through quite a bit. Once I knew what that meant, which you intuit what it means, like he's calling for the hardcore guys. But once you know it, I didn't even realize that towards the end, Darcy gives Gabe, the Macon Blair's character, a set of red laces, like as they're trying to wrap up.
Yeah, he earned his stripes, which he doesn't actually directly kill anyone in this, but he's obviously like coordinating some of the violence.
Yeah.
But we have our own theories about Darcy and Gabe and where their friendship was going.
They go through a whole journey where in the early part of the movie, and again, it's more stuff that like I couldn't get till the second watch, where like early part of the movie, Darcy comes in and blames Gabe for fucking it up. Like, hey, we staged this thing. We were going to have this girl killed and you did the wrong move when the band saw it. Now you made it complicated. So he's kind of on the outs. And then he realizes, oh, this is perfect because what? Because they didn't realize that Daniel was in it with Emily.
Yeah. So now they're using that to get Daniel motivated to help them by blaming the band for Emily's death. So they scapegoat the band. And now Daniel's gung-ho about let's go get him. And I mean, we know him through Tadpole, who seems like a sweet guy. So we're not really sure if Daniel's going to be, he said he's his brother and he seems to have a good enough relationship with him to call him up and be like, hey, book this band for me.
Yeah. Or is he his cousin?
Sorry.
His cousin, right. But close enough.
But also, who is Daniel? Do you want to call that out now?
Oh, yeah. Speaking of rock band pedigree, Daniel is Stephen Stills, the lead singer of Sex Bomb from one of our early episodes, Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Sad that he got out of being a musician and now he's just like muscle for neo-Nazi venues and he left Canada at some point.
I was like, that face looks familiar.
A lot of that in this movie, a lot of those guys. Who did you think of when you first saw Macon Blair on screen?
I had to look it up because I knew the name Macon Blair because you had told me about Blue Ruin. And I'm like, okay, there's a Macon Blair in this movie, but I'm like, that's Thriller John Daly. Yeah. I'm not the first person to notice the resemblance between those two gentlemen, but they really do look alike.
I didn't notice it until you said it. Now I can't unsee it. But I think part of it has to do with the fact that how he's styled in this movie is much more John Daly-esque than he is in other movies. Because like in Blue Ruin, he's like a vagrant. He's got long hair and a beard. And in Hold the Dark, he's got a beard. So he's usually got some kind of big beard thing going on. But here he's clean shaven and that's just, it's given John Daly. 100%.
Yeah, it's easier to see. But just to close the book on Macon Blair's Gabe character, I realized that the reason Darcy gives him the laces at the end is because they realized that Daniel was leaving with Emily, right? They were starting to suspect, and Gabe is the one that put Darcy onto his trail. They're like, hey, don't use him. There's something going on with him and Emily, et cetera, et cetera. Then he finds that his car is parked there and it's full of suitcases. But the other thing that's in there that I didn't get on the first try is a baseball bat that's linked to an incident from the previous Easter. Do you remember Darcy drops this little thing?
Yeah.
And Daniel had it wrapped in plastic and stuffed in his trunk, and he was going to use it as leverage or maybe even bring down the Darcy syndicate.
That whole scene now, you just like unlocked something in my brain where I didn't really understand why he was sitting in the car with it running. And the guys are like, what are you doing? And he says, oh, it's a new car. I think it was getting choked. So I just wanted to turn the engine over. But he was waiting for Emily to get in the car. Shit. And she never came out. Ugh. He was like ready.
So close.
That's what he was leaving right then.
It's crazy. There's a lot in this movie that's really fun when you like link it up.
Yeah, that's wild. And so let's talk about Patrick Stewart as Darcy Banker a little bit, because much hubbub was bubbed around him playing a neo-Nazi psychopath, like this terrifying guy. Isn't he just so evil? But I think, no, I don't think he's scary or terrifying or evil. I think he's like a bureaucrat.
Yeah.
He's very calm and practical about all this. He never really raises his voice except once or twice when he like flicks Gabe's ear or whatever. He gets mad mad at him. But he's just annoyed most of the time, like mildly annoyed and inconvenienced. And just like, that's scarier than if he was some big blustery evil Nazi going on about ideologies and stuff. Like, no, he's just a heroin dealer. And this is probably an easy group of people to have as customers.
I'm totally with you on that. And that was part of where on my first watch, I was like, oh, the big bad wasn't scary enough. And then I realized more and more that it's totally intentional by Saulnier. In a lot of the movie, he's trying to shatter tropes and cliches and flip your expectations on you. It's a little hard to get in, especially if you go in going, oh, I'm watching a Hostel style horror movie. And actually, it's not that. And actually, even the parts where it looks like it's doing horror tropes, it's trying to subtly reverse things on you. And so as I warmed up to it, I'm like, yeah, actually, the character of Darcy is super cool because he plays it so cool. And he's just like, all right, this will be over soon. Talk to you in a minute. Like, that's how he's telling the people that he's trying to figure out how to kill successfully.
Yeah, it's much better than him trying to play it. I don't know who else could have played this role, like Ian McShane. He would have been scary and imposing, but no, he's leveraging that kind of grandfather quality that we all know and love about Patrick Stewart and using it to his advantage here. He even says, "Can you hear me at this volume? I don't want to shout."
Like, yeah, my voice through the door. Hoarse. Can I speak more quietly? And they're all like, "Yeah." And you brought up this quote to me that Saulnier talking about his own movie was like, the idea that they would hand the gun over is just ridiculous. I can't believe that. And I'm like,
yeah, he seemed like mad at himself for putting that. It's like, buddy, you're the one with the power to change that.
You wrote this and directed it. But then when I rewatched that scene, Patrick Stewart's Darcy is so disarming because they can't quite pin him down. He's not really contradicting them. He's just like trying to suggest a different way and he's distracting them. And he actually works to talk them down into a thing where it's like, look, this is the only thing that makes sense. You just got to give us the gun and then we can de-escalate. And when you describe it to someone, you're like, you would never do that. That's crazy. That's crazy. But then when you hear that scene, the way that dialogue plays out, it's really well done and really well acted on both sides. And you're like, no, I get it. It seems stupid now, but I get why they decided to do that because it just sounded like the only thing to do.
What's their compromise? Like, we're keeping the bullets. Yeah, I'm sure they don't have any more guns and or bullets.
No more bullets on the other side of that door.
On the neo-Nazi compound. But later we find them like literally handing out guns to anybody that wants one.
Yeah.
With directions like, don't shoot anyone, but here's a gun.
Yeah. And then that's where Darcy's plan keeps changing too, because first it's don't shoot anyone, you're going to dig the bullets out yourself. And then it's like, oh, we've got 3, like he's constantly doing the calculus. Oh, we've got 3, the 4th can just disappear, so fuck it, shoot him. And that's when he gives out guns to everybody. It's a constantly evolving plan, and it definitely tests your mind to keep up with it.
Which I'm also not so sure about the credulity of this plan. Would the cops really just be like, yeah, I guess these dogs just bit these kids all over their bodies in these very specific, well, like, I think what they do is the plan was to have the dogs kill them, but then direct them to bite the areas that were also stabbed later. To ruin the scene. Because I was like, that's not how dog bites look. Like when his arm is like clean slices across. I was confused about how that was going to work. But then I think that's what they were getting at, was they were just going to have the dogs kind of chew on them after they were dead.
Eat quite a bit of the people to hide the evidence. Yeah. But still, 4 people.
Which, like, isn't CPS going to take, like somebody should do something about those dogs then. Yeah. There's defending your property and then there's whatever the fuck they did.
Right. But he does tell, to his credit, again, there's little parts where as Darcy realizes that, he tells the dog guy, this is probably going to shut down your dog business because I might need to do away with all of them, but as long as I survive, I'll take care of you. Like, all those little things are in there. It's wild.
He says something about like, it's your livelihood, but as long as I don't lose mine, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
And the dog trainer, wrangler, is Kai Lennox, that guy, if there ever was one. He plays Clark, but if you ask me, probably his best role is as a prison guard named Glenn Cosgrove on a little show I like to call Justified. And that is our Justified crossover of the week.
Justified crossover of the week.
Oh, shit.
We got one.
We got
one.
Didn't
think we were going to get. I was surprised it wasn't like Eric Edelstein. I was like, he just pops up on shows.
He could have totally fit in there. There's a lot of people, honestly, in this that could have showed up on Justified, but I'm glad we got one.
Yeah, I was almost like, there are some movies we do where there's like 7 and I just got to pick one. But I was shocked. Kai Lennox is the only one we got in this movie because a lot of these dudes look like they could also be oxy peddlers in Kentucky.
It's not a stretch.
Man, it's like some of these little Nazis are creepy. I hate the one in the 3rd act with like the little cherub cheeked one. Those little apple cheeks. You know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you?
Little tuna can, yeah.
Tuna can.
Yeah, they get grosser and grosser as they like go down.
It's like they have to get worse and worse Nazis. Like not like more evil, just like slightly uglier. I'm sorry. Like I know the actors aren't. I don't mean to be cruel. That's not nice.
That was the quality of their acting that made them so repulsive on screen. plane.
Correct. Yeah, that's what it was. So should we go through the final act? Should we take it home?
Okay, here we go. Darcy sends another pair of skinheads to the green room to finish off our remaining heroes once and for all. But they won't find it so easy. That's because Pat and Amber have painted their faces and are now fighting back with a warrior fury. They outwit, disarm, and kill the two thugs, then make their way outside. There they run into Gabe, who is weary and regretful over the bloodshed, and he surrenders. Gabe then helps lead Amber and Pat through the woods to the house where Darcy has taken their friends' bodies. Then Gabe heads off alone to a nearby farm to call the cops, while Pat and Amber go to confront the remaining bad guys. Pat thinks they're just going to foil the staged burglary scene that Darcy is cooking up to explain the dead musicians to the cops, but Amber has a more final sort of revenge in mind. So Pat goes along with her, and they shoot Darcy and his remaining two minions dead. Then the new friends sit down and wait for the cops to arrive.
I did want to point out that they are motivated to paint their faces and run around like crazy people based on this paintball story that Pat tells.
He starts the story and is like, oh, it's like paintball. This happens like earlier in the movie. And there was just like another great choice by Saulnier where you think that, oh no, this is the part where the hero gives the rousing pep talk. And they literally call it a pep talk, but they cut him off. Like he doesn't tell the story. They go, no time. We've got to go outside and fight. And I thought that was great. And maybe might have been a little disappointed that they let him come back and finish it. But I do like the way it was handled because it set up the whole finale.
So it's about a time that apparently is based on a real experience that Jeremy Saulnier either had or heard about from Rick Spears, who is the real life one-to-one swap for Rick Silva, I think they call him in this movie, is the character, who they were playing paintball against these like former Iraq war vets who had like just come home and were using real war tactics and like slaughtering them. And then they were just like, what if we just acted like idiots? And then like they won. And that was a real situation that it's unclear if it happened to Jeremy Saulnier or Rick Spears was a friend of his that told him about it.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, that was a real thing that happened.
Which is good. It helps for writers, I think, to look for something in life to pin these things down because they're inevitably still feel somewhat Hollywood. Is like, okay, what would real people do in this situation? Would they really tell each other a story about paintball and then paint their faces and pull this gambit? Kind of no, but it does help that it's grounded in something that makes sense when you hear the story. And I guess this was a part where I also liked the whole Pat and Amber's gambit better on second watch because I'd warmed up to what it really meant, which was a combination of things. At first, I didn't know how to take it. Are they supposed to have really turned badass like in the end of a Rambo movie?
Certainly not. No, I never saw it from that angle for a couple of reasons. And you called out one of them here is that Pat's whole thing is I'm going to stand with my back to the door and yell down into the hatch and pretend to be one of the Nazis and trick them into a false sense of security. And then I can turn the tables on them. But they're immediately like, wait, turn around. Who are you? Like they don't fall for it. And then he turns, they're like, who are you? And he turns around and says, what, Odin himself?
Odin himself, which was like, what is that supposed to mean? Or is it just some stupid shit that this character thought of to say?
And then he jumps through the hatch and like falls. Like he doesn't even like land it in the cool Superman pose or anything.
Right.
He just like collapses like a pile of bricks on the floor and just like scurrying back, banging his machete against the walls.
Yeah,
and just
he still thinks he's fooling them. He's like going, oh, I'm fighting with the band members down here, guys. Come help me. And they're like, they totally don't fall for it. There's a lot of comedy in this whole sequence.
Especially because like they find their hair, like he shaved his head to blend in with the neo-Nazis. And the guys are just like picking up clumps of his hair and like looking at it confused.
The first thing they see is the clippers and the hair. And they're like, what the fuck is this guy thinking?
This movie is low-key pretty funny, especially in the third act, because I feel like it's when the audience is maybe almost numb to the situation, just like the characters are, where they're like, what does Amber say? She's like, I'm hungry. Like they're just over it and they want it to be over one way or another.
They are. And once I got into that same state of mind and shared vibe, when I got on that wavelength, that end scene is really funny. And it's a relief because the first half is really scary tension stuff. And we talked about the really brutal violence. And then this whole scene is kind of silly and it's supposed to be a release where you can celebrate the heroes finally turning the tables, but you can also laugh because they do it in a silly way. The way that they keep turning the one guy around back and forth, chasing one then the other, and they keep distracting him. And Amber tries the trick where she like throws her legs over the hatch to jump down to him, but it's not really her. It's one of the dead bodies. And she does it twice with two different dead bodies and it works on the guy. It tricks him the second time.
And then after that, Pat is sneaking up behind him with a machete and just a clear shot at his neck, ready to kill him. And then Amber just starts wildly shooting a handgun into the basement and almost kills Pat.
Kills them both, yeah.
And then of course, like he ducks and now all of a sudden he's on guard on the other. It's just they can't get out of their own way. but they're living by Rick Silva's mandate. They're doing what he said.
You're right. I guess that is the spirit of Rick Silva, which is a funny line in itself. When Pat says Rick Silva, like, I don't know, it reminds you of every funny story that your buddy told about your other buddy. But yeah, it is fun. And then she does away with him, and pretty much with that particular Nazi who's on top of Pat, shoots him in the head.
The little apple-cheeked freak.
It takes you back to the gruesome violence of earlier, but now it's a little bit celebratory too, right? Because they're winning.
And like Amber's reaction to the violence is just another tell that she's maybe not as innocent as the band was, because first she guts Justin without a moment's hesitation or remorse.
Right.
And then we see when Pat first kills a guy, he kills the bartender, the same one that shot Daniel with the shotgun. He machetes him in the neck, but he's like very taken aback by it and very clearly scarred by it. But when Amber shoots this guy in the head twice, she just shrugs it off.
Yeah. But that's where he turns the corner, and he makes a joke about it too. He's like, you've totally flabbergasted him or something. Like him turning from a really meek, gentle soul into a killer evolves over that last 10 minutes of the film. And then she again convinces him, from instead of just breaking up Darcy's fake crime scene, to like, no, the reason we walked over here was to kill them all, Pat. And he's like, looks at his friends and he's like, I guess you're right.
Yeah, because he's looking at the not just dead bodies, but like desecrated, destroyed bodies of his friends. Like none of them are getting open caskets. But like he's kind of badass in that scene too. Like when they get the drop on Clark and one of the nameless skinheads, and he's pointing the gun at him through the car, and he goes, give me your gun. He says, I don't have one. He goes, I'll shoot you either way if you don't give me one.
Yeah, you believe him there.
Like, that's not something Pat would have said in the beginning of this movie, or maybe even 20 minutes earlier in this movie, but like he's seen some shit.
I think Yelchin did just an exceptional job conveying that character who is he's still that person, but Amber was driven around the bend immediately when she witnessed her friend Emily get stabbed in the skull at the beginning, and it took him till the end, but he still has that sort of gentle body language, but he's gone over until I've got to avenge my friend's death mode, and it's very effective.
Yeah. And I don't know if you caught this, but when he's pointing the gun at the skinhead and he goes to like circle around the car, he gets his sleeve caught on the side mirror.
Oh.
And apparently he did that by accident in one take and fucked the take up. But then Jeremy Saulnier liked it so much because he was like, it felt very Pat. And he was like, do that again. Make sure you do that every time.
Yeah. There's a little awkwardness as he comes around the car, and it is very Pat.
Not to be confused with the Saturday Night Live movie. It's Pat.
It is Pat, but it's not that Pat.
The less said about that Pat, the better. And then we got to talk about Gabe a little bit, because Gabe, whether or not you think he gets redeemed is up to you, but he certainly helps the heroes out in the end. He lets them know where to go. He goes off to get the cops, and he does get the cops. He could have probably just fled, and Amber's threat that she would track him down feels pretty hollow. You know,
That's
like,
true.
I don't know that she's going to be able to, even if she tried, I don't know that she'd succeed. You need resources to do that sort of thing. And she doesn't seem like she's very well to do.
No, that's a good point. He still had the option when they let him walk away through the woods to just disappear. And that's a big move. Like, he tells them, I want to go to jail, as opposed to them shooting him in the face when they first get the drop on him. And he really does. He had the option of maybe going on the run, but he's actually, I'm going to call the police on myself and all my buddies at this point.
I don't know. He's an engaging character because he always seemed a little reluctant, but he's clearly guilty by association for so much of this heinous shit that goes on. But it becomes clearer the more you watch this movie with a real attentive eye, like how much in the dark he is about a lot of this stuff. And we figured it out. There's a line first, like Patrick Stewart gives Worm and some other people some heroin and goes, tell them the party's on us if they just hole up for a few days. And then he says a little while later, like, we need a new house band. And Gabe is, oh, you think Cowcatcher's going to talk? And he goes, oh, don't worry about that. And he spiked Worm's dose. He killed him. He wanted him. He was a loose end. He killed him and some other people that were with him just to tie up loose ends. It's probably not a hard sell to be like, oh, the heroin addict overdosed on heroin.
It's more a clever setup.
So do you know what a cowcatcher is?
It's the thing on the front of a train, right?
Yeah, it's the thing that on the front of a train. If there's a cow on the tracks, it takes care of him.
Yeah.
It's pretty grisly.
It's a grisly image. It's not a bad band name.
No, I Googled it thinking it was going to be something like heinous, like about the Holocaust or something, but it wasn't.
Maybe they had some secondary connection of particular cowcatchers, but yeah, it's a rock band name.
Yeah, not a bad name. And that's why I was like, I should Google it before I say that's not a bad band name.
That's
just
true.
make sure I'm not like endorsing something.
God knows. It probably also has a secondary meaning in white supremacist
supremacist circles. Yeah. Yeah. Who knows? And then the magnanimous ending of Darcy. Like Pat says, you were so much scarier at night. And he's just a sad old man in this last scene who just tries to walk away in a very interesting move.
Yeah. He doesn't have moves. He doesn't have anything super heroic. heroic to do. He just walks away to try to buy a second to pull out his gun and shoot them. But they're like, they just shoot him anyway. And then he manages to turn around and they finish him off. But it's very awkward. And like we talked about with that character, he's not a supervillain and he doesn't have anything really up his sleeve in the end. He had his bureaucratic instincts and then they only took him so far and then he just got shot.
Yep. And that is Green Room. And by the way, Saulnier said there are 2 possible answers for the big question at the end of the movie. The movie ends with the line when Pat tells Amber, I know what my desert island band would be.
Okay.
And she goes, why don't you tell somebody who gives a shit?
Right.
And, which is not only funny, but also makes sense because she wasn't even there for that part of the conversation. Like,
right.
She cares nothing about that. And it was apparently Creedence Clearwater was one of the ones like he was going to say, but they thought it was funnier if he just didn't say it.
It is funnier that way, but then they play that Creedence song in the closing credits, which was a cool song. And I'm like, I wonder what the significance of that is.
All you had to say was the Creedence song. You don't have to say it's a cool song because that's kind of,
They're all cool, but it was one that I didn't know because I know all the Creedence hits, but I didn't know that one. It was fun.
I don't know them well enough to know they're deep. What's your favorite Creedence song?
Maybe Have You Ever Seen the Rain?
I think Run Through the Jungle.
Run Through the Jungle's cool. There's just a lot of fucking cool ones.
Yeah, I fucking love Creedence. I don't know that I want to try to see them live. Or Fogerty, I think, is touring by himself.
Oh, is he? Okay.
I think his voice is shot.
It might be. He's got to be real old.
Singing that way for 60 years at this point.
Man, that dude was a talent. He was that band. There's a good Creedence doc out there on streaming somewhere that I watched that's really pretty cool to see what they did. And the other band members were interesting contributors and they created a sound, but man, that dude was a talent.
What a voice.
Yeah.
So that's Green Room. You want to hear what some of these peeps have been up to?
Yeah, I absolutely do.
So we talked a little bit about Saulnier a couple weeks ago when I watched Rebel Ridge, but just to give some more details, he would follow this one up with Hold the Dark, which was a script written by Macon Blair. And Macon Blair also has a smallish role in that movie. It's the only movie Saulnier has ever directed that he didn't also write. And it's probably his weakest movie. I've never seen Murder Party, so I can't speak to that. And it was received pretty, not lukewarm, but just warmer than lukewarm. People liked it, but nobody really loved it.
Okay.
And I think what it's missing is that kind of hyper, like the villains in that movie are hyper competent and almost one note and kind of mysterious. And it's just one of the most serious movies I've ever seen. And there's always a little through line of humor in Saulnier's movies, even if the humor is just, look how badly his hero's fucking this up. Like he doesn't know what he's doing. But there's really none of that in Hold the Dark. It's just, it's generic in a very competent, I don't want to use the word competent again, but it's very polished. It's very well directed. It's well written, but it's missing that kind of special flair that he brings to his movies, I think.
Yeah, I noticed even in Rebel Ridge, which is pretty serious, and it certainly starts with a serious topic of police abuse and racism. It lets its hero be funny where like he does this thing and then he goes, oh, that's where my plan ended. I don't know what to do next. Like that hero is pretty competent. He's like a traditional thriller action movie type of hero, like ex-Marine.
Yeah, he's like a Rambo.
Yeah, he's like a Rambo. He's an ex-Marine combat trainer. But there are those moments where he like pops his own bubble and is actually, I've only trained. I've never been in a real fight. And there's all these moments that sort of let him let the air out and be a little bit light.
Yeah, and that movie's downright optimistic compared to some of his other stuff.
Yeah.
It's breezy, but it is really good. And all he's said, he has another movie in the works, but he hasn't said much about it yet. Many people want a sequel to Rebel Ridge. Somehow I doubt that will be coming. He doesn't seem like a sequel director to me.
Yeah.
But he's got another movie cooking. He doesn't have a big filmography if you're really jonesing for more Saulnier in your life. He did direct the first 2 episodes of the 3rd season of True Detective, which was considered a return to form. I found the season boring overall, but still well made. But he was apparently supposed to be much more involved in the 3rd season, maybe to the point where he would direct all of the season, kind of like Kari Joji Fukunaga directed all of season 1. And I think they were trying to do that with Saulnier for season 3, but I think him and Pizzolatto had a falling out. So he did the first 2, which were the strongest 2 of the season, no doubt, and then left. But yeah, it'll scratch that itch if you're hankering.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's a guy who made an impression. Obviously, hooking up with A24 was huge for him. Now it puts him in this cool class of stylish thriller horror directors. And he doesn't have that much work. I've only seen the 2 movies. I've only seen Green Room and Rebel Ridge. And I definitely see the comparisons. So I'm like trying to figure out what is this director about and what other kind of things might he do. But they both had like all these similarities. Both the plots have an attractive young man and woman who are strangers at first. They come together. They fight against the big bad who's an old guy guy with a gray beard. They form an unlikely bond by the end. I thought actually Rebel Ridge, while it was a little bit safer and more Hollywood ordinary in its like setup of its premise, it had some really fun plot twists that I was like, oh, I wish Green Room had as many twists. Because in Green Room, by the second half, they're just running out of the green room and back in because they kind of like get pummeled every time. Whereas Rebel Ridge is one of those movies where it's like, oh my God, that just happened. How's the hero going to deal with this? And then he comes up with something and like, how's he going to get out of this? And then he comes up with something. So it's very creative. And I'm interested to see where Saulnier goes from here.
Yeah, Rebel Ridge I am reluctant to call it an action movie because it's really a procedural. A big chunk of the movie is spent like uncovering this conspiracy that's unraveling in this small town. So it's you hear the name, you see the trailers, you see the big action sequences that have been the focal point of the marketing, and you're like, oh, I know what kind of movie this is going to be. But it's like them turning over stones and seeing what's underneath for most of it.
And I felt like it got a little ordinary and dragged a little bit in the middle, but by the end, when it kept escalating the jackpots that he was getting into, I'm like, how are they going to get out of this? And it was actually really clever and fun the way all the problems were solved. I got a lot out of it.
Yeah, same. But you all know all that because I already talked about it and tweeted about it from the Blast Zone account.
Yeah.
So Yelchin, let's talk about his career a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
He was 27 and unfortunately he died tragically in a freak accident. He was checking his mail and his Jeep Grand Cherokee rolled back on him and pinned him to a wall and crushed him. He did have quite the posthumous filmography, though. Star Trek Beyond, Porto, Thoroughbreds, Rememory, and We Don't Belong Here. He's obviously very fondly remembered by co-stars and co-workers and fans. I think the first time I really noticed him was a movie called Alpha Dog, which was my number one boy. Ben Foster played his older brother who owes money to a drug dealer played by Emil Hirsch. There's a lot of names from years past that like Emil Hirsch. He doesn't really pop up and stuff anymore. But like Anton Yelchin is basically taken hostage as ransom. But he's just so sweet that he like ingratiates himself with the drug dealer's posse and they all love him. And then the movie takes a dark turn, of course, it's based on a true story. But like that to me was just like the blueprint of what his career would be like. He's just like a sweet guy. Like, he comes off so genuine in every role. And I think like directors just latched onto that and they were like, he played Odd Thomas, which was a Dean Koontz character. It was a series of films about that. And I was like, he's doing Dean Koontz movies now, but he owned that shit and he was perfect for that role. He even motivated me to go read a Dean Koontz book for the first time since I was like 12. And I was like, yeah, like this is him on the page. He nailed it. And he's very missed. I think there's not a lot of actors that could pull off his roles.
It's very sad to imagine the career that he didn't get to have because he would have certainly done a lot more wonderful work.
And not to say anybody who died young through some fault, I don't want to say fault. When people overdose young or, die through misadventure, it's obviously sad and tragic, but there's almost a sense of they knew what they were playing with when they got into that world. He was like legitimately a freak accident.
Yeah.
And there was lawsuits between his family and Jeep Chrysler Dodge because they might have known that could happen. And didn't recall the vehicles, whatever. I don't know how that all got ended up, but yeah, just a very sad situation.
Yeah. It makes it more senseless and tragic and also more scary because it's like, oh, that could happen to anyone. It could happen to me.
Yeah, I had a family member that actually lived after his car rolled over him while he was working on it underneath.
Oh, God. That's a nightmare.
But yeah, and then Poots, Amy Poots, I would say she hadn't really done a lot of stuff that I liked before this. Like she had been in That Awkward Moment, which is just a garbage Miles Teller, Michael B. Jordan rom-com. The Aaron Paul Need for Speed movie. Ooh. And then the bug shit crazy Terrence Malick directed Knight of Cups featuring Christian Bale.
Wow.
So I thought she was like established when this movie came out. And I guess she was getting work, but none of it was anything to write home about, really. Shout out to the Get Up Kids. But after this, I guess, is where she really took off because she followed this up with A Country Called Home and Frank and Lola. But then her big break, I think we can all agree, came as Ashley Wednesday in Pop Star Never Stop, Never Stopping.
Loved her in that. Didn't really know her before that. And honestly, I didn't clock her in that later when I saw this really compelling actor in Outer Range, which I watched the first season and absolutely loved. I did not connect those were the same person until you told me this week.
What was the character's name? Emily in Outer Range?
I forgot. She's so mysterious and spooky, which she's really good at doing.
She is. She does that in this movie too. Yeah, she ruled in Outer Range. And I still got to watch season 2. I want somebody to tell me if it's at least somewhat of a satisfying ending because I know it got canceled unexpectedly. But interestingly enough, her 2 most recent movies are The Art of Self-Defense and Vivarium, which are both from 2019. The Art of Self-Defense was quite good. but that's 5 years ago. She did I Know This Much Is True, which was I believe a Max miniseries with Mark Ruffalo in 2020. And then she did Outer Range. So she was working, but just not in film. And then she has 2 movies in post-production now, Hedda and The Chronology of Water. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah, I hope those movies are good. I really like her as an actor. I think she's really appealing, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of her.
Next episode, we're covering something spooky. Shut the fuck up. I'm not telling you what it is. You got to tune in.
It's all the more spooky that way.
Yeah.
We hope we spooked you this time. I think I'm going to be more spooked. I think I know what's coming up, and I'm scared to watch it.
Yeah.
But you guys are going to enjoy listening to it, I think.
I'm not scared. I'm very scared. I'm always scared. Thank you guys so much for listening. You can follow us on Twitter at BlastZonePod, also Instagram at BlastZonePod. You can email us, blastzonepod@gmail.com. If you have any feedback, movie suggestions, questions, you just want to chat movies with us.
Just want to say boo.
And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on your platform of choice if you want.
Please give it a shot if you would.
And we'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
The Blast Zone.